he the Grassland bird, Grassland bird and full of those conservation talk, and that's stable Grassland bird recovery. Tree and flowering.
So, there's a bit of a change from what we talked about, more research and action and conservation action. So this is the Grassland Bird Collaboration. It's a program of Willistown Conservation Trust. And I just kind of wanted to walk you through how we've been able to use banding and tagging data to kind of build this program. So as we all know, grassland birds are in trouble, and they're actually the group of land bird species that are in the greatest. So 2/3 of grassland birds have experienced population declines, and actually a quarter of those are tipping point species, which means that they've lost 50% of their population in the last 50 years, and they're on track to lose another 50% in the next 50 years unless we can reverse this trend. And bobolinks are one of those species. So we can see the precipitous decline from that graph, and we don't want to see those numbers. So that's the bad news, but there's good news. These losses can be reversed. And so what we're doing is working through voluntary partnerships with farmers and landowners and other conservation organizations to address these issues locally so that we can help these birds before they're considered threatened in this area. So just kind of walk you through the evolution of this project. I did my dissertation research on grassland birds, and I used bird survey data and landscape measurements to predict where we might find these birds in the greater Doe Run area, which is about 30 minutes southwest of here. And so when I mapped my data, I found sort of a hot spot emerged in that area. So it's important to know where these birds are, but if you're not managing for the birds, then it doesn't do that much. So when I finished my PhD, I joined with Willistown, and we started looking at the timing of breeding to look at what are the safe mow dates, because that's really one of the greatest threats to these birds is they're actually able to use non-native grasses. They don't mind the full season hay fields, but the problem is if the mowers are coming in when they're breeding, then we're just disrupting this next generation of birds. So we did that in 2020, and then in 2021, we added in nanotag data. So we were looking at local movement, and also we joined with researchers in Vermont and Maine to look at regional patterns. So that meant tagging these little buggers, and I say that with all due respect, but they did toy with us, as you can see. They love to sit on the tram and watch us as we desperately try to get them in the net. But we did prevail. And so our protocol involved, we took blood samples, we did color banding, and then of course, we deployed 20 nanotags, 8 females and 12 males. And there are so many people in this room that have been part of this project. It's good to name them all, but this has definitely been a collaborative effort among the Willistown program, members of the program. So we bagged them, fleeced them, and got a mug for posterity. So when that was finished, we wanted to we began nest searching, and the idea wasn't to do an exhaustive nest search, but it was more to think about where are the nestlings in the stage of development, so that we could set safe mow dates for the birds. So around the first week of June, we found that they were usually 4 to 5 days old. We found a later nest on June 16th. So thinking about that, they're in the nest for about 10 to 11 days after they hatch, and then they're walking around for a little more than week after that. And so during that period, they're very vulnerable to any kind of disturbance in the field. So based on what we found, we realized that July 1st would be a safe time to get the majority of the birds off the nests and to join the adults. And one of the rewards for being able to find these tiny little pups of grass that are hidden under the thatched hay is that we were able to band these little babies and color banded them and just can't be free to bother. So in the meantime, we had set up sensor gnomes at the three banding areas, and we were looking at local movement. So we found that the majority of the birds were regularly detected among the three fields. So what that meant to us was that these birds don't see the boundaries that we humans see. So the landscape is basically connected for them, and it provides collectively, the different locations provide for their needs. So they may be nesting in one field, but they're foraging in another, and they're moving seamlessly among those fields. Excuse me. So, this then helps us to think about management. When we want to think about how we're going to manage for these birds, we need to think about them using these different field sites. And then we kind of took a step back and we looked at the regional picture. So we actually had some birds that were leaving during breeding, going up north and having short forays and then coming back down. One of the really big things that we found was that the Delmarva Peninsula was an important stopover ground. We were talking about stopover grounds earlier. And so half of our birds were found in the Delmarva Peninsula, and not only were our birds found there, but the birds that were tagged in Vermont and Maine were also found there. So we think about then how do you manage for the complete life cycle of the bird? So if this is an important stopover ground, what are we doing to provide for these birds during that important time? So that was 2021. And then as the pings started to slow down and the birds had gone to South America, we turned our sights to 2022. We were going to continue banding the bobolinks, but we added meadowlarks in. And we also wanted to look at the impacts of different management on grassland bird activity and breeding. So as part of the Meadowlark Migratory Connectivity Project, we were one of 12 US sites. We were deploying tags on meadowlarks. This was a program run by the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center. And these are pretty beefy tags for beefy birds with very sharp talons. And Lisa knows that. So these tags, they don't have to pass a tower. They just send the data up to a satellite and then it can be downloaded. And what they were looking for was where's the overlap among these populations? And it was eastern and western meadowlarks. So we were able to, because we were established in the area, we were able to help contribute to this project, and we'll be disbanding them again this year. And we continued with our bobolinks. We deployed 10 tags in 2022, 2 females and 8 males, and we were actually very fortunate to catch 2 of the males from the previous year, and they were in the same home fields that they had been in the year before. And so it was an opportunity to learn more about these individual birds. So our male at Schoolhouse Farm, we'd only gotten local data for him. So in 2022, we had the local data, and then we were actually able to track his migration path. And our buck and doe male, he was really a creature of habit. I mean, when we compared the data from year to year, his local movement was the same, and his path to South America was also very similar. And again, the Delmarva Peninsula was an important stopover. So 9 of our 10 birds were down there, including the 2 males that we had recaptured. So we are actually looking at possibly working with another partner down there who will be tagging the bobolinks as well. So we'll be able to add in local breeding data along with the migration data and to inform management in that area. And one of our other exciting moments of 2022 was that we actually got our first international detection. We had 2 detections on the north coast of Colombia, the gateway to South America, where these birds are wintering in Argentina and parts of Uruguay. So that was how the band was working, the tagging was working in. The other piece we had was this looking at the influence of management. We had a student from the University of Pennsylvania, Lee Hart, who was looking at 4 different field types: early mow hay fields, late mow hay fields, row crops, and wheat fields. And we are looking at them over 4 survey periods: late May, early June, and early July, to kind of get snapshots in time to understand how the composition of the field changes throughout the breeding season. So we found 7 species, and the 3 up to the top are focal species for this grassland bird collaboration project. So in doing the surveys, almost all the fields had at least 1 grassland bird species in at least 1 survey. And some of the fields actually had 4 to 5 different species, which that's a pretty diverse field for grassland birds. And the other thing that was kind of gratifying was that probability map that I showed you before. We were able to fill in some sites. So areas where we had expected to see the birds we've actually found them. So it's always nice when theory meets what's on the ground. So looking at the breeding activity of our focal species, bobolinks were only able to breed in the late mow fields. So they had been present in early mow fields and they returned later in the season. But that disturbance in the middle, they weren't able to breed in those fields. And if you look at that, that map at the top there, those are the 2 sites that we have been looking at for the last 3 years, and they do late mowing in those fields. So we've seen the results of waiting. We can see that these are healthy breeding populations. Later in the season, we see the young birds, we see the density increase. So it's evidence to show that it can work if they're not disrupted. They can have successful breeding. Meadowlarks, these were our surprise birds. They were our most widespread breeder. They bred in the late mow field and in early mow fields. So it's possible the nest placement more along the edge of the field, maybe they're not disrupted during mowing. And the other bird that was sort of a surprise was that our grasshopper sparrows were only breeding in early mow fields. So they nest later than bobolinks and meadowlarks. So it's possible that the mowing occurred early enough that they were able to come back in after the mowing and establish their nest. So what this kind of drives home for us is that we can think about, when we're thinking about the landscape, we can think about also building flexibility into management, because not every field is, if you mow early, it's not that you're totally destroying the possibilities for those fields. And I think having that flexibility gives us an opportunity to work with the farmers in a way that that makes it, I think, easier to find solutions what we're going to do. So what we know is that the grassland birds are breeding in the greater Doe Run area. And if they're breeding there, then that means we have an opportunity to help them breed more successfully in this area. And we also know that the birds are relying on the connectivity of the landscape, and different fields are important at different times. So one of the sites that we have just has never really had a large breeding population, but once the fields around it are mowed, all of the birds are flocking there because they manage with cattle. The grasses are high longer into the season, and so the birds are no longer territorial. You'll see 4 or 5 bobolinks just all hanging on the same blade of grass, and where they're staging and they're given an opportunity to eat. The young birds are doing test flights, and then they leave from there, and our tagging data shows that. So we can think about that also builds flexibility in, and we have to think about providing for these birds throughout the entire cycle of when they're here for the summer. And we also know that species can occupy different fields based on their breeding habits. And the other thing that we've seen is that shifting mowing dates benefits young birds within the year. So we've been in fields from sort of the last week of June to the third week of June to the last week of June, and you can see the difference. You can see the young birds, how much stronger they are with their flight. And so that means that they're going to be able to get out of the way of the mower. And that's really all that they need to do to be able to join the adult birds for migration. And this, of course, can benefit the birds year after year. So we have an opportunity to make the greater Doe Run area a hotspot for grassland bird conservation. So what we're working on now is to establish a conservation working landscape in that 20,000 acre plus hotspot. And so we know that our success is only going to come through collaboration. Everybody has to be invited and to solve this problem. So we need to understand agricultural and economic factors that are related to grassland management. And then we can provide guidance for management based on what we're seeing in the field. So the research is informing what we're telling to the farmers and the landowners, and they're also telling us what they need to do, what their bottom line is. So I've focused a lot on the data and sort of like the hard strengths, but I think it would be a mistake to overlook the importance of the softer side of science. So really what we've come to learn is that the science can inspire and ignite sort of a flame around conservation efforts. And as landowners and farmers learn about the importance of their land for these birds, they start to think about how they can provide for the birds and what part they can play in making sure that these birds persist. So I actually had a landowner tell me that she's happy to share this part of the world with those who love nature. And this was, of course, after she held her first Nevada state. But that really stuck with me because that's really what we're hoping to do, is show the abundance of this part of the world. And it really is a special place. It's the nurturing ground for the enduring cycle of life. And we see this through the changing landscape. We see it in the short stubby grasses in April, setting up the nets to catch our meadowlarks. And then later on the first day of the field season, when we're welcomed by the newly arrived bobolinks, or seeing the wildflowers peeping through the grass, or kneeling down in the wet grass, releasing a restless bobolink back to its mate, or watching a colleague disappear into a sea of grass as she tries to track these birds in the field, or watching a flock of bobolinks form a fluttering cloud above grass that seems to have every color of the rainbow in it, or watching a bobolink perched and practically disappear into a wheat-colored sea, or walking through the fields a few days before it's about to be mowed and seeing young birds take strong and steady flights and knowing that the breeding cycle is complete. So each of these moments in time is like a puzzle piece, filling in the gaps to complete the cycle. And they're each linked and they're each necessary. And we really need to be thinking about those links among the people and the birds and the landscape as we try to solve these conservation problems. So these two pictures is sort of what it's really all about. So they're symbolic of the connections around the land and possibility of having agriculture and bird. So on the left, you see we see the agricultural productivity of the land, which is really the reason why that area has been able to hold off the pressure of development. And then we see the bird that's using this working landscape. And so the grassland collaboration is really, we're hoping to be the bridge between the two, to work in partnership to develop a land conservation ethic that benefits all those who love and use the land. Thank you.
Maybe one question?
Sure.
Public landowners should have the availability to set the right growing.
what would you recommend based on your findings, just the examples, like waiting to build it later in life, get your prayer, make sure that there's not enough.
Yeah, I think, sort of